The chair now recognizes Ms. Titus for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses, especially Secretary Mayorkas, for being here today. As I'm sure you know, it's exactly 1 year ago today that we sat in this hearing with these exact same witnesses, the exact same issues, the exact same questions, and here we are, and this committee's done very little other than talk about the border. I want to thank you first, Mr. Secretary, for working with me on the Sears decision. You know, this week is the week of the big race in Las Vegas, and we worked at my office with your office very hard to get the security level raised to a level 2, and that's been done, and we appreciate that kind of cooperation. Also, I've introduced a bill to codify that program. It's called the Special Events Program and Support Act. It's bipartisan, and so I hope we can continue to work together on that, because I think that will be a good next step. You know, we listened to the story of the threats and who's threatening us and how they're threatening us and where they are and where they came from. You know, right now, we're talking about what's happening in the Middle East and how it has been translated to threats or violence in this country. Before, it was talking about it in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on abortion issue. So it seems like the methods are the same, but the motives changed by just whatever is politically on the agenda. And it must be like playing whack-a-mole, how you deal with the threats. Would you tell us kind of what you have in place to adapt or adjust to what the current news is that's bringing out perhaps a new group of these kind of homegrown terrorists?
Congresswoman, is that a question directed?
Yes, or
me?
Mr. Ray, either one.
I would say that the two leaders seated with me and their colleagues in the intelligence and law enforcement enterprise are the best in the world. And that gives us visibility in terms of the threat landscape and allows us to operationalize the measures to meet that challenge.
I would say that we rely heavily on partnerships, state, local, not just with the federal agencies here, but in particular with state, local law enforcement, with the community, with the private sector, in order to be able to try to anticipate where the threat's going, so that we go to where the threat's going to be and not waiting to always be in a reactive posture. Our goal is to be ahead of the threat, and partnerships are the critical ingredient in that. Again, not just within the federal government, but with all those other very important stakeholders.
I know we have a fusion center in Las Vegas where you have a strong presence as these agencies, but also the private sector. Nobody has more security than gaming does, that eye in the sky, so I think they are valuable partners. Excuse me.
Yeah, I would just add to what my colleague said that, you know, we have a workforce combined across our different agencies that is just full of tenacity. And their job is to not sleep on threats. Their job is to understand, be curious, and evaluate every single report that comes in and take it seriously and understand whether it reflects a real and credible threat and whether it reflects a changing trend in the kind of dynamic that we're facing here in the country and globally. And so we're really proud of that tenacious workforce.
Congresswoman, if I can just add, because Director Ray used a term that is incredibly important, that it's the term of partnership, because he indeed is correct. It's not just across the federal enterprise, but with our state, local, tribal, territorial, campus law enforcement, with the private sector, and also, very importantly, with our international partners. It really does require a community of action.
Thank you. I would ask you, Director Ray, about something you kind of expanded on in this report or your statement today from a year ago, and that's international organized crime, the retail crime that we see, organized retail crime. We're going to see more pictures of that as we go into the holiday season, the smash and grab, the shoplifting that then the money is turned into human trafficking or drugs or guns or whatever. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's a priority for you?
Well, we are in a number of states supporting our state and local law enforcement partners who are really the first line of defense on that. But to the extent that there are national connections, national networks, to the extent that the crime that you're describing contributes to some broader organized criminal activity, then we're actively engaged. And in some states, for example, we have dedicated task forces that are focused just on that issue. It is something that is heavily concentrated in a few geographies in particular, but it's starting to become a more national trend.
It's not just big box stores anymore, it's small stores. I was in a drugstore and somebody came in, just raked off the eyelashes into a backpack and walked out with them. Now, eyelashes aren't power tools, but it's a problem at all levels. So appreciate you kind of keep an eye on that. Thank you, I yield back.
The gentlelady.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Sopko. We appreciate your time here and your honesty, your passion. I remember how President Biden went in front of the cameras and tried to reassure the world that Afghanistan could hold, and what happened? It didn't. Clearly, this administration is far from functional and far from cooperative with United States Congress and far from transparent with the American people. This administration's failed withdrawal in Afghanistan led to $7.12 billion in taxpayer-funded military equipment being left behind, thousands of our Afghan allies captured and slaughtered, and the killing of 13 precious service members at Abbey Gate. And we just heard about Ryan, who feels like he's being left behind by his government. Well, I would like to echo the comments from my friend, Ranking Member Gregory Meeks, Representative Gregory Meeks, that Ryan has not been forgotten. He is not going to be left behind. We'll do everything that we can to bring him back home safely. Despite all of this, we are still funding Afghanistan, the Taliban, with $11.11 billion still flowing from the United States, with the gaps and the lack of oversight that you just mentioned. You said that there is so much more to discuss. Well, sir, I would like to hear more about that. I would like for you to continue along answering the line of questioning that Mr. Meeks asked just recently. What additionally do you have along the details that you shared that you would like to share in the next 3.5 minutes?
Well, I think the point I would like to make is this entity, which I assume many of you don't know much about, which is shocking in and of itself, because that's $3.5 billion that's been moved for the benefit of the Afghan people. Again, a noble cause to try to organize or help the economy of Afghanistan and the central bank. But the appointment of people to it, this fund, I think Mr. West was quoted as saying that it wasn't a very open or democratic process. So we
And again, you've mentioned that you work in the same building with him, and you have not seen him yet.
I don't work in the same building with him.
Okay.
I don't want to say. He's at the State Party, SRAP.
Okay. But you've made countless entreaties to meet with him, to gain understanding, and he has not cooperated.
And I've met with prior SRAPs. I mean, no one has a problem with us talking. We share information. We learn what's going on and what their issues, and we try to help them. But the State Department has basically obfuscated and delayed many of our reports. And it's not just him, it's other people at State, and we've gone out of our way to try to work with them. But we're still not getting cooperation. Now, we are getting cooperation from USAID, and I must thank the members of this committee and the members of other committees who have actually come to our aid on this, and USAID has been very responsive, but we still have problems with the State Department on not just the fund, but on getting material in general.
And so because the State Department is failing all over the world, and particularly with transparency with Congress and the American people, you are being forced to gain your information from other sources. What are some of those other sources, and what makes them problematic? You mentioned the UN. Could you go into a little bit more detail from some of the areas that you're getting your information and what you're missing?
Well, we still get information from USAID on a regular basis. We do, off the record, get information from people at the State Department. We have an aggressive...
Off the record, sir. Why off the record?
Well, because a lot of people just don't want to be identified as talking to us. Actually, one of the things that State Department issued, and I have a, they basically ordered all of their employees not to talk to us.
Do you have
Yes.
something stating that specifically that you could share with the committee?
We can definitely share that with you, sir. And in our last protocol that we tried to write with them, we asked to include that the department should rescind any prior directive to its employees not to communicate with SIGAR, and State Department scratched that out.
And so we have evidence showing that employees of the Department of State are being directed by their leadership not to communicate with Congress and the American people.
Well, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about SIGAR.
Well, we've experienced some of that same lack of transparency, and I think that oversight is exactly what is needed. It seems like a State Department that feels like they are above oversight. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.